right, it is week 2, and this week we are beginning our first look at the unit Writing to Secure Employment, starting with the job search. But really, we're going to begin with ethical considerations before we get into the job search, because I think it is important that we understand the ethics of what we're doing before we actually try to do it. All right, so let's just jump on in here to ethical considerations. All professionals need a basic understanding of the ethics of technical communication. That is just something that most companies have, like different compliance trainings that involve ethics and helping you to make sure that you don't breach any policies or violate any laws or anything like that that would jeopardize the company or, jeopardize your own career. So let's look at that. So there are 4 basic moral standards for ethical dilemmas and for deciding how to approach different ethical dilemmas. So we look at the rights of individuals, basic needs, and welfare, and see what rights do people have, or in the case of companies, what rights do companies have in a particular situation. We look at the standard of justice, how the costs and benefits of an action or policy are distributed among a group. So that's, looking to see who is affected and how they're affected and how things kind of balance out, weigh out over the different scenarios that are involved. We look at the standard of utility, the positive or negative effects that an action or a policy has currently, will have, the known ones that will be applicable, or even some of the effects that might happen. We're not quite sure if they will or not, but they might happen. And so good policy takes into account the rights, the justice, and the utility, as well as the standard of care, which is the relationship we have with other individuals or the relationship that a company has with different interest groups, different stakeholders in that company. So all 4 of these are important. We can't say one is more important than the other. We can't say that we have to look first at rights, then at justice, then at utility, then at care. That's not kind of how this works. They kind of all play together. And, it might be first that a company is looking at utility and then going on to some of the other, hopefully all 3 of the other moral standards. But they are all important, and they are all something that we have to take into account when we are making decisions and enacting policies, writing documents related to different policies, that we have to make sure that we are kind of adhering to the different moral guidelines that we have. And we also, not just the standards, but we also have to take into account the ethical obligations that we have. So when you are in the workforce, you have ethical obligations to your employer, to the public, and to the environment. So to your employer, you have the obligation to know what you're doing and to do it. You have to be competent. You have to be diligent in your work. You have to perform to the best of your abilities. Even knowing that every once in a while there may be something you don't know and you have to learn it and you have to make mistakes sometimes, but you're always moving forward. You're always trying to do your best. You have to have sort of an obligation of generosity to your employer, in the extent that you agree to help your coworkers where it is beneficial, where it doesn't violate your own rights and things. But even sometimes you have to be willing to give up some of your own rights in order to benefit the company. or benefit your coworkers, your team that you're working on. You need to maybe give up some of your time sometimes. But at the same time, I'm going to be honest here and say that in the United States in particular, Western culture in general, but particularly in the United States, we have a very unhealthy view of what that generosity is. Um, Sometimes our employers expect far more than is reasonable, and then they are violating that standard of care that they have, that moral obligation, the moral standard of care to care for their employees, to make sure that their employees are healthy and happy and have their needs met. And so we all know that we have needs for boundaries around work time and personal life and the different aspects of personal life that go with that. And if your employer is frequently asking you to give up your personal time, your personal life for their benefit without, fair compensation for that, you have an obligation to yourself, which is not listed up here, but you have an obligation to yourself to set boundaries around that. But you have to also understand that there might be some consequences to that. Sometimes it works out really well, and employers are able to say, oh, maybe we are asking too much. Other times you get that one, manager, supervisor, boss, whatever, who, just on that power trip and it's like, oh, well, if you're not going to do everything I ask you to do 24/7, then you don't want to work here. Um, Actually, probably you don't want to work there unless you are in a profession, that does require a kind of 24/7 being on. A lot of, medical, especially emergency medical, fire, police, things like that, where, there is kind of a 24/7 expectation for at least certain days of the week. That's obvious. You signed up for that. Most of us, when we take a job that says your work hours are from 8 to 5 or from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., we expect that those are our work hours, and we're not going to have to spend hours and hours beyond that to please our bosses. So don't get the wrong idea with the generosity, but the generosity is really not being solely in it for yourself all the time, but working as a team member for the benefit of the company, which means sometimes you do give up some of your personal time, your personal freedoms, to to do extra, but not let it go too far. Um, excuse me. Like I mentioned in the last videos, I have seasonal allergies, and they are active right now. So I have some mint tea, and I will probably cough and drink my tea a lot during these videos, but I just ask for your patience. And your generosity, as we were just talking about. But also, you have the ethical obligation of honesty and candor. So you shouldn't be stealing from your employer. You shouldn't be taking information or intellectual property or physical property that belongs to your employer, and you especially shouldn't be sharing that outside of the company, which is part of the confidentiality. And then candor, you should be truthful. When you're asked about things, you should be honest in what you say. You should tell the truth in what you say back to your company or about your company. But you also have these obligations of confidentiality and loyalty. So you shouldn't be going around and sharing things from your company that could jeopardize their mission and their values, their business. And you shouldn't be bad mouthing your company, your coworkers, in your personal life. I mean, obviously, we all go and vent to our close circle of friends and family. Sometimes we vent on Reddit or other places like that we can remain fairly anonymous, and that's okay. But it is not okay to publicly defame your company, and your coworkers, and that will most likely come back to bite you in the future. So, maintain the loyalty as far as respecting the rights of your company and their expectations of confidentiality and loyalty. To the public, you have the obligations of fair treatment. So you're not going to be favoring one group of people over another without, good reason for that. You need to be providing safe and effective products and services. So as a company, as an individual in the company, you have the obligation to make sure that there's proper testing and vetting of products and services and that, so that you are not held liable for anything that goes wrong. And then we all have the ethical obligations to the environment. So again, really considering potential and actual environmental damage, and that goes beyond just things like harmful chemicals and stuff like that. But think of the environment as broader than that, and like the community that you are a part of. If your company is a part of a particular community, you want to maintain good relations with the community. So in that sense, you're talking more intangible than tangibles. But you do want to put environmental concerns at the front of what you do as well. All right. There is a lot more in chapter 2 about ethics, about legal obligations, and that right now we're not going to go through them in these slides. We will be referring back to them later, so they are part of your reading assignment for this week. So please make sure that you do read this chapter. Again, it's not a long chapter. It's not filled with irrelevant material or anything like that. It doesn't go on rabbit trails like I do. It's pretty straightforward and easy reading. So please make sure you read the rest of the chapter. So we're going to kind of take this in the direction of applying for a job, since we're in our unit of writing to secure employment. And we want to talk about how about different companies, they do investigate candidates to determine their qualifications. So if you see on a job application that the required qualifications, the required education, experience, skills, certifications, whatever, they list those out, and you look at those and think, okay, well, I have some of these, and I know I could get these before I had to start work if I were hired, so I'm just going to put these other ones on here too. Don't do that. Okay, if you don't have certain qualifications, don't misrepresent yourself. Companies do their research. They will investigate. They will try to determine to the best of their abilities if you have what you say you have, if you have the education you say you have, if you have the skills, the certifications, the knowledge. They will do their best to figure out. They will vet you, and they want to make sure that you're not going to be conflicting with their company's values. So if they do find lies, misrepresentations, like exaggerations, most likely they are not going to offer that particular candidate the position that they're applying for. And if you've already been hired and they decide to do, kind of internal audits of all of their people and find out that you've misrepresented yourself, that you've or flat out lied, they can and often do terminate your employment. So you want to keep in mind you do have these ethical obligations even when you don't yet work for an employer. Right. So what you're going to do this week for ethical obligation practice, you're going to be looking at 2 ethical dilemmas as a team. So again, these are collaborative documents, one team document that everyone on the team is contributing to. If your team has not already set up some way of communicating, whether it's an email group, a chat group, whatever it is, Discord group, I've never used Discord, so I don't know how that works, but you guys all do. I'm going to check it out one of these days, though. It's on my list. So, whatever group you have, if you haven't set that up yet, please do, because you're going to need to be in regular communication as far as everybody contributing to these team projects, these team assignments. And the sooner you kind of get your flow going, the better. It's going to be a lot easier when we move to our next unit, writing in the workplace, which is only in a few weeks. And by then you should be working as a team that, you know, has a process, has a method, has communications, lines of communication open. You kind of know, you've gotten to know each other a little bit, and you're ready to take it a little bit further than these smaller team exercises that we're doing. And just because they're smaller doesn't mean they're less important. They're actually very important. You know, ethics is something that's often overlooked, and we need to make sure that we are really paying attention in a technical writing course to ethics. So, as a team, you are going to consider these two scenarios and do what you're told in these scenarios. The first one, it is early spring and Sam needs a summer job. On his town's news website, he sees a post for a potential job. The only problem is that the job is listed as a continuing full-time position. Sam will be returning to college in the fall. Okay, should Sam apply for the position and just not say anything about returning to college? Why or why not? Prepare two responses, one in favor of Sam applying and one opposed. And you need to justify your reasoning for each one. So explain your reasoning for each one. Yes, he should. No, he shouldn't. So that's, you know, got two parts to it. And then the next ethical dilemma is you serve on the advisory committee of your college's bookstore, which is a private business that leases space on campus and donates 10% of its profits to student scholarships. The bookstore wants to stock Simple Study Guides, a popular series that gives plot summaries and character analyses for classic literary works. The sale of these guides averages $10,000 per year in profits in similar markets. 6 academic departments have signed a statement condemning this idea. Should you support the bookstore or academic departments? Explain your reasoning. So in this one, you're only giving one response. So as a team, you have to come together and decide which response you're going to give, whether you are going to side with the bookstore and stock Simple Study Guides, or whether you're going to side with the academic departments in asking the bookstore not to stock Simple Study Guides. And keep in mind, this is a private business, but it leases space on the campus. So, you know, go in and explain your reasoning for that. Just know that there isn't a specific right or wrong answer that I'm looking for here. I'm looking for you to take a position and for you to explain the reasoning for that position based on your understanding of ethical obligations as well as the ethical standards. All right, and is more, you know, with that in mind, as much as you can refer back to these different standards and obligations, the better for explaining your reasoning. All right, so that's our kind of brief discussion of ethics. If you have any questions or concerns about this, please let me know. Make sure you do read chapter 2. Ideally, you will have read up through page 22 to where it says your legal obligations before you do the team exercises. So it's not very long, not very many pages that you have to read, and it just explains in more detail what I mentioned on the previous slides. Right, so have fun with this.